I think upgrading. I think upgrading every 2 generations of graphics cards is a pretty normal cadence. And so a lot of people with a 3090 might be wondering, okay, 5090 is coming out, is it time for an upgrade? And I think the answer to, is the 5090 way better than the 3090? Well, yeah, that's an obvious yes. But the question on should you upgrade is a little more nuanced than that, because that doesn't mean the 3090 doesn't still deliver an excellent experience in almost every single game out there. In fact, I'd go as far as saying every single game out there. It's just there are certain games where you can't take advantage of the absolute maximum settings and resolutions. For example, path tracing. There was a lot of improvements going into the 40 series, now even more going into the 50 series, with path tracing modes like 4K RT Overdrive. Here we're seeing DLSS performance mode. With the new transformer model, the 3090 is only delivering a little over 30 FPS, but the 5090 is over 90 FPS. It's a completely worlds apart experience. I would say the difference between unusable and usable. I also tested out the older CNN model of upscaling, and while I can now tell that it looks way worse than the new transformer model, especially because this game has ray reconstruction, which looks much better with the introduction of the transformer model, I'm not seeing major performance differences on the 4K upscale. Interestingly, I do see some differences on the 3090 when we go into the 1440p upscale, which we'll look at in a second here. But I think this really highlights the main thing the 5090 can do that the 3090 can't, which is really heavy path tracing workloads at 4K resolutions and still hitting high frame rates. If we move into 1440p, the 3090 is a little bit more capable, but still doesn't really excel. 1440p RT Overdrive DLSS quality with the new transformer model, the 3090 is only able to hit 41 FPS, while the 5090s hang out at 108. And again, this is not using any frame generation, if you're wondering. This is just raw frames. Yes, they're upscaled, but it's not generated. So this is a true high refresh rate experience on the 5090. And also with the new transformer model, I think the quality level upscale looks quite good. But if we switch back to the older CNN model, we'll actually see that the 3090 performs noticeably better than it did on the transformer model. I'm seeing 52 FPS now. So the 30 series tensor cores are just less capable than the 50 series tensor cores. And so the new transformer model, especially for the ray reconstruction piece of this, isn't as performant on the 30 series as it is on the 50 series. And that's what we're seeing here. However, even with this CNN model, the 3090 is still not over 60 FPS, and considering you could choose to play at other settings that still look great and have a high frame rate, I think what we're really learning from this is the 3090 can still absolutely enjoy Cyberpunk, but probably not using RT Overdrive. Now, 1080p resolution, native resolution, I don't think that's a common monitor choice for these types of GPUs, but we can see that the 5090 can do it natively at 99 FPS, whereas the 3090, even at 1080p native resolution, is hanging out at 42. So heavy path tracing modes are kind of one of the places where you would notice the upgrade to the 5090. But in normal, lighter ray tracing workloads that are a bit more console focused, and I guess my fat head doesn't need to be in the middle of the screen this whole time. Let's become tiny. If we look at Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which I think is a good example of games that force ray tracing, there's no non-RT mode, but with that in mind, they're focused around consoles, which don't have massive ray tracing performance. The 3090 can hit 63 FPS here at the maximum non-full RT mode, and if you kick on DLSS quality, it's hitting 86 FPS. Yes, the 5090 is massively faster, but the 3090 is delivering an excellent experience, even on a 4K screen, even at these supreme settings, which use a lot of VRAM. The 3090 still has a lot of VRAM, all of that. So it's not like the 3090 isn't still a capable ray tracing card. It's just the new path tracing full RT modes aren't super well suited to the 30 series. Now, if we go along and take a look at kicking on the full RT mode, we see that really shown off here, where in the full RT mode, even using DLSS quality, my 3090 is only delivering about 20 FPS here, whereas the 5090 is hitting 63. So it's pretty usable, and the 3090 is not. But again, you don't have to kick on the full RT mode to enjoy Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. And that's important to keep in mind. If we go to performance mode upscaling, the 3090 is now closer to 30 FPS, but the 5090 is now 82 FPS. By the way, all the upscaling past our Cyberpunk testing is in the older CNN model because I'm just using what's built into the games. And at this point, only Cyberpunk has the full released version, although you can use the NVIDIA app to override to the newer versions if you'd like. At 1440p resolution, supreme settings, which again include ray tracing, and the max settings that aren't full RT, the 3090 is killing it at 98 FPS. 5090 is faster, but you're having a great experience still on the 3090. At the Supreme settings plus full RT, even using DLSS quality, the 3090 is once again not going to be doing these. 33 FPS, you could technically play it, but I don't think it's the right settings to choose. Whereas the 5090 is delivering well over 90 FPS at these settings. Now, moving on to Silent Hill 2. 4K epic settings with hardware accelerated ray tracing turned on. The 5090 is, I think, the only graphics card that can actually average over 60 FPS without any upscaling at these totally maxed out settings in this big Unreal Engine 5 showcase. Not that it's the most optimized Unreal Engine 5 game. And the 3090 is only hitting 30 FPS here. But once again, remember, upscaling at 4K looks pretty good. DLSS quality especially. Now the 5090 is jumping all the way up to 91 FPS, so nice high refresh rate experience, and well, the 3090 is only hanging out at 47. This is a pretty slow-paced game, so honestly, that's fairly playable. But you might need to go to performance mode upscaling on the 3090 to get up to around a 60 FPS experience. I'm seeing 59 here in this very demanding area because all of the foliage here is not super optimized. Like, it's a pretty demanding scene to run. 5090, well over 100 FPS, so definitely a better experience. But again, the 3090 still delivering a very usable experience here. Now, if we turn off the hardware accelerated ray tracing at 4K epic native resolution, the 5090 can deliver 73 FPS, and the 3090 probably not going to use these settings at 34. Whereas if we kick on DLSS quality, the 3090 is now up to 51, and it's, again, very playable in this slow pace of a game. You still might want a higher frame rate, but still. And the 5090 is over 100 frames per second. If we take a look at Final Fantasy XVI at 4K Ultra settings, the 5090 is at 78 and the 3090 is only at 37. But again, kick on DLSS quality, the 3090 is now at 56 FPS, 5090 is at 108. Very different experience, but still not a bad experience by any means on the 3090. And if you were willing to use performance mode upscaling, the 3090 is now hitting 74 FPS in this scene. Yeah, the 5090 is 82% faster at 135 and might even be getting held back a bit by the rest of the system. At 1440p resolution, the 3090 is hitting 65 FPS, and the 5090 is at 117. So a good experience, native 1440p Ultra, and you could upscale from here to get an even better frame rate. In God of War Ragnarok, 4K Ultra no upscaling, even the 3090 is able to almost hit 60 FPS average at 56, whereas the 5090 is a high refresh rate, 128 FPS experience, even without upscaling. DLSS quality, the 5090 hits 170, but the 3090 is at 80. You're still having a great time here. At 1440p Ultra, the 3090 is at 89. Still having a great experience here, even though the 5090 is more than doubling the performance at 183. Horizon Forbidden West, 4K very high. The 3090 is a little under a 60 FPS average. The 5090 is at 121. Yeah, it's more than doubling the performance of the 3090. But, kick on DLSS quality, and the 3090 is now hitting 70 FPS. And the 5090 is at 155. So yeah, much higher refresh rate experience, but not like you're having a bad time on the 3090. And if you go to 1440p, very high settings, and very high, by the way, all the settings here are the highest graphics presets I'm testing here. The 3090 is hitting 82, and the 5090 is at 175. But still a great time on the 3090. If we look at Ghost of Tsushima, 4K very high settings, the 3090 is a little under a 60 FPS average, the 5090 is 119, more than doubling the performance. But they're both pretty, the 3090 is still pretty playable there, and kick on DLSS quality, and the 3090 is now up to 84. Yeah, the 5090 is up to 170, but it's not like you're having a bad time on the 3090. 1440p very high settings, no upscaling. The 3090 is giving you 91 FPS. In a single player game like this that you're probably playing with a controller, 91 FPS is great. 5090 is able to deliver 179 though, if your CPU can keep up. Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga, one of the big Unreal Engine 5 graphical showcase games. 3090 is only hitting 36 FPS, and by the way, high settings is the maximum graphics preset in this game. The 5090 is hitting 76, so yes, a much better experience on the 5090. But if we kick on DLSS quality, the 3090 is now averaging 59. So now, especially in a slow-paced game like this, I think 59 is just fine, honestly. This is a game that targets 30 FPS on consoles, so this is going to look better and play twice as smooth as you'd get on a console experience when you're using the 3090. 5090 is getting 111 FPS though, so yeah, certainly better, but you're having a great time on the 3090 as well. 1440p max settings, the 3090 is averaging 60 FPS. That's without kicking on any upscaling. DLSS quality would give a nice boost to performance as well. The 5090 is a nice high refresh rate, 115 FPS though. Call of Duty Black Ops 6, I decided to throw in at least one game where we're turning down to in this case basic settings, or in other words low settings, rather than max settings, and I think that would make the most sense in an online multiplayer game. Where I think it is pretty common to turn down graphic settings to declutter the environment as well as get a higher refresh rate experience for a competitive advantage. 3090 is able to do 100 FPS here without upscaling. 5090 is able to hit 204 though, but again, you could use upscaling to boost performance further. And at 1440p basic settings, the 3090 is at 156 FPS. If you're not getting the kill at these settings and frame rates, you probably have a skill issue. You could also turn on upscaling to get even more FPS. 5090 is hitting 301 though, pretty crazy. And if we go down to 1080p, we can see the 5090's lead is reduced to a 70% lead because it is showing signs of being limited by the rest of the system. Because this, again, we're just hitting such high frame rates that the rest of the system can't keep up here at 1080p low settings on a 5090. The 3090 is hitting 201 FPS though, which is still quite good. Anyway, so that's the tests I ran for you. How do we summarize the overall experience here? I would say the important thing to note is that in any game we picked, even though the 5090 is delivering a much better experience, and sometimes you can't max things out at 4K on the 3090, if you're willing to use upscaling at 4K, you're still having a great experience. And again, I was testing like ultra settings. What if you turn down to high? Right? Or use a more optimized setting combo, the 3090 is still going to be having a great time. At 1440p resolution, the 3090 doesn't even usually need upscaling to hit max settings at 60 FPS unless we're talking about a path tracing experience. So the 3090 is still having a great time. That being said, the 5090 is, in the average of all of the benchmarks I ran, about 2.15 times as fast, or you could phrase it as 115% faster. 215% the performance, 2.15 times as fast. Now, it's important when we sort these results, though, I think, to look at a couple of things. One is when you sort these, the 5090 shows its largest leads when we're talking about full RT modes. We're talking about Indiana Jones, full RT. Cyberpunk 4K RT Overdrive. So it's these full ray tracing, path tracing modes where the 5090, I guess it could be a little bit bigger now, anyway, where the 5090 is showing its largest advantage. And I think those are also the settings that the 3090 is not going to give you a satisfactory experience at. So I think that's the main thing that you unlock with the upgrade to the 5090 is access to those full RT modes. Also, what we're seeing is that the smallest advantages usually are happening at my 1440p or 1080p testing, the few times I did 1080p, or more upscaled 4K results. And all of that is pointing to the fact that the 5090 is more held back by the rest of the system at those frame rates. So it's maybe not showing its true potential advantage. So if I just sort for 4K resolution, we now see that the 5090 is 2.19 times as fast, or 119% faster, if you want to phrase it that way. And I think that gives you a more realistic look at the actual raw power differential. But notice again that when you are on, when you're more likely to be CPU limited, you're less likely to see the full advantage. And I think that's important for somebody who is thinking about upgrading a 3090, but not thinking about upgrading your entire PC. Because the 5090 can reach the limits of even a 9800X3D, especially if you're on 1440p or lower. Even at 4K, if you're using more aggressive upscales, that's effectively rendering the game at lower internal rendering resolutions, reducing the burden on the GPU and making you more likely to become CPU limited. So I would stress that if you are on a CPU platform from around the time of the 30 series release, there's a good chance that your CPU is going to hold back a 5090 if you try to upgrade it in the same system. I just think you should be aware of that fact. So yeah, think about would you want to do a full system upgrade if you are thinking about that 5090 upgrade. Another thing to point out is that there's it seems to be, like I said, a bigger advantage in the heavy ray tracing workloads. So if we look at just ray tracing results, I'm seeing that the 5090 is showing 2.34 times as fast, 134% faster. Although keep in mind that a lot of my ray tracing tests here was emphasizing path tracing workloads, full RT Overdrive, that kind of thing. And we saw that in the lighter ray tracing workloads, like Indiana Jones Supreme settings, that kind of thing, we're not seeing as dramatic of an advantage for the 5090. And if instead you're like, I don't really care about ray tracing. So if we turn ray tracing off, now I'm seeing the percentage differential drop to basically 2 times faster. Although keep in mind that some of these are 1440p and 1080p results that might be holding back the 5090's true potential a little bit. So I still think it is more than twice as fast. If you're wondering about the value calculations here, we could talk about that a little bit. Again, if you're buying the 90 class, I'm not sure how value conscious of a buyer you might be. I mean, I don't want to generalize everybody, but usually 90 class buyers might be like, I have a good amount of money. I just want what's best. I don't necessarily want to waste money. And I don't want to and if you already didn't upgrade to a 4090, you might be the kind of person who's like, well, I don't need to upgrade my PC all the time, you know? So I don't know, like I'm trying to think about who's in this kind of buying mode, but let's do a few last calculations here, just thinking about generational improvements and price to performance improvements and things like that, because there's a few ways you could look at this. First of all, there's the MSRP difference. So the 5090 has a $2,000 MSRP, and the 3090 had a $1,500 MSRP, which means that the 5090 is 33% faster when you, more expensive when you compare MSRPs. But also keep in mind that there has been a lot of inflation since then. So if you adjusted the 3090's MSRP for inflation, that's not going to be as dramatic of a price increase. The other thing to keep in mind is when the 30 series actually launched, we were in the middle of a crypto boom / global supply shortage due to the pandemic, and oftentimes people were paying $2,000 plus for them. So a lot of actual 3090 buyers who bought it during the time it released actually may have already paid around $2,000 for the 3090, in which case it's a bit of a wash. We are saying that the 5090 in our 4K testing, where it's less likely to be held back by the rest of the system, is showing about 2.2 times faster, 2.19 times faster, or as fast. Now, if we divide that by the MSRP in ratio of 1.33, this gives us our FPS per dollar increase. So generationally, we're skipping 2 generations ahead, but you're basically getting 65% more frames per dollar with the 5090 compared to the 3090 when evaluated at their original MSRPs. Now, another thing we could look at that's kind of interesting is the square root of 2.19. Now, why is that interesting? That's giving you the average generational uplift since we're skipping 2 generations ahead. The 5090 is 2 generations beyond the 3090, and it's 2.19 times the performance. The square root of that would give you the geomean, the multiplicative average generationally, meaning that between the 4090 and the 5090, we're averaging about a 48% improvement per 90 class generation, is what that's telling you. Now, in reality, the 4090 delivered the larger part of that generational uplift, and the 5090 is delivering a smaller part of that generational uplift. But when looked at on average, we're seeing an average of a 50% generational improvement in the 2 generations that we have. Now the square root of 1.65 is also a little bit interesting, because then what we're looking at here, the 1.65 is the performance per dollar improvement, but it's over the course of 2 generations. So the geometric mean of those 2 generations, giving you the average result, is we're getting about 28% better performance per dollar per generation. But again, the vast majority of that improvement happened with the 4090 rather than the 5090. So kind of interesting. Anyway, thought I'd throw those numbers at you at the end. If you want my final advice for 90 class buyers, I mean, yeah, the 5090 is a lot better if you have an extra $2,000 lying around for your PC hobby, and that's really not that big of a deal for you to spend. I think it's a lot better, but and could, especially if you're on a 4K high refresh rate display. I really think that's where the 5090 shines, 4K high refresh rate. Not only can it get you access to those more difficult ray tracing modes, but also with the new multi-frame gen, and the 3090 doesn't even support the normal ×2 frame gen. If you're on a high refresh rate display, once the 5090 gets you a high enough base frame rate, kicking on frame generation in a lot of titles will give you a lot more motion fluidity on that kind of high refresh rate display. But if you bought a 3090 for like a 4K 60 display, I really think the 5090 kind of goes to waste on a 4K 60 display. I'm gonna be honest. I think it's a lot more at home on like a 4K 240, where you get 70 to 80 FPS, after using normal upscaling and raw power, and then maybe use frame generation from there. I think that's the best case for the 5090. And yeah, I think, but like I said, I think you might need a full PC upgrade if you're on, CPUs from when the 3090 originally came out. So there's a lot to think about. It's definitely, the 5090 is absolutely a lot faster though, so there is that. I hope all of you found this video useful and or interesting. I've got a lot of other 5090 head-to-heads. We've got a 7900 XTX and a 4090 head-to-head. I'm also about to be doing a 4080 Super head-to-head. And then once we get the 5080 out, I can start doing some head-to-heads like 5080 4090, 5080 3090, 5080 7900 XTX, all sorts of stuff if you stay tuned to the channel. Or if you're watching this in the future, it's probably already there. Go search the channel. I hope all of you have an excellent day.